well, no lack of that. So we're looking at King Lear today. And with that, the second last play, we're going to look on the course. I don't know why I put it in this particular order. And I'm a little frustrated with myself that I did, because it was written for a few years actually after Hamlet. We haven't done Hamlet yet. Hamlet will be the last play. I like to do things chronologically normally. So this was written around 1605. And of all Shakespeare's tragedies, probably one of the blackest. You've heard me talk about his tragedies, how they deal with their morality plays of sorts, insofar as they are there to show injustice and chaos and rebellion, all sorts of different vices, and then over the course of the play, to counter those vices. Some force figure comes forth, and then the malefactors are punished at the end of the play. They're all dead. All the bad guys are dead. So justice is restored and order asserted, and God's providence is confirmed and affirmed through the actions in the play. And in this particular play, I say it's one of the blackest because it's not quite as simple. It's moving in the direction of realism. Insofar as Cordelia, the most likable character in the play, is killed at the end. That doesn't seem very just. It's not very tidy. It's not a neat ending. It seems to lead to more questions than answers. And early on, and in many of Shakespeare's plays, especially in the comedies, there's an overly tight ending, and some would say an unrealistic ending. So like in Measure for Measure, when the Duke decides he's going to marry Isabella, you think, I didn't even know that there was anything going on there. Like, why on earth is Isabella getting married to that old guy? And what does she think about that? And it doesn't matter. He's getting married. It's more symbolic than anything at that point. It's not very realistic. I mean, it's not unrealistic that the Duke would take interest in her. Maybe she would take interest in him. But there's nothing in the play leading up to it that would suggest that that was part of the plan even. And so it seems a little bit unrealistic. And I think in general, you can see in Shakespeare's plays this sort of trajectory away from the medieval morality play tradition, which is more allegorical, towards a more what we would call realism. And in King Lear, the death of Cordelia is more like realism. It's not as neat as all that. God's justice is affirmed in this, and yet a girl dies for seemingly no purpose. And Shakespeare just lets us sit with us. And so it begs questions in the audience about how this could happen. But I think that's a lot like life. But tragedies happen. We call them tragedies, even though they're not tragedies of the Shakespearean sort. And people die that we would say don't deserve to die. And there doesn't seem to be a purpose to the death either. It's not like she's a martyr of some sort. It's just a death that seems rather senseless. So that, in that sense, it's one of the blackest tragedies. Let me say something about the background. It is rooted in British legend and folklore, so probably gleaned from Holinshed's Chronicles, which told the story of the British people. And in that, there is a story of King Lear and of Cordelia. And in that rendition, the actual historical source, Cordelia survives and she marries Edgar, which is a pretty happy ending. The two most virtuous characters in the play end up marrying each other. So, I mean, it almost jumps into comedy at that point with that sort of ending. And Shakespeare doesn't follow his source, which is interesting. Again, when we're thinking about historical dramas, which the cinema does all the time now. They do usually American history, but sometimes other histories, and they play with the facts a little bit. They change the endings, they change events, and if you know the history well, you're irked that the director has deviated from the history. And if you love that figure for who he or she was, then you're particularly annoyed. if you don't know anything, it doesn't matter to you one way or another, and you may actually think, oh, well, but this is a better story, and that's the point. It's a better story. I don't particularly have problems with directors deviating from historical accounts. It's art. They're doing it for a slightly different purpose than historical, this happened and then this happened. It's the ordering of events, and even the actual events themselves, you can play with those for a particular purpose, a dramatic purpose, a artistic one. I think that's within artistic license to do so. Although there's all sorts of questions that arise from it. But yes, please.
Well, I think even like if we examine the four Gospels, they're a prime example of how sometimes the ordering of events is different.
Yes.
In the Gospels, it's because the author is trying to emphasize a different point, or bring forward like something more specific in the Gospel.
I think that, so your point there is valid. So in the four Gospels, there are sometimes, so the synoptic Gospels, the first three are very similar in their, not just their worldview, but the way in which they look at the text. And John's Gospel is something completely different in some ways. And sometimes the events seem in different orders, and that becomes challenging. And do we read these as historical accounts? And my answer is yes, they are historical accounts. And it's, if you look at the genre, I don't want to spend too much time on this because that's a huge topic unto itself, like a really big one. They present themselves as historical accounts, like in Matthew and Luke. We even have genealogies, and genealogies are for historical accounts. So, and Matthew, or rather Mark, is synoptic similarly. So clearly historical in its intention, and yet the ordering of the events is for a slightly different purpose than just recounting this happened and then this happened. The ordering of the events and the is for the purpose of making an emphasis that the gospel writer wants to bring to our attention. There's no doubt about that. So that's the complexity there. You have a historical account, and some will say because it's artistically represented, it is therefore not historical. And I think, no, that's not how it works. It can be historical and change events for a dramatic purpose without us. But this case is different because he's actually changed the events. And not only does Cordelia not marry Edgar, she dies. So a particular injustice arises out of that. I don't think we have anything like that in the gospel accounts. There's nothing there that would suggest a total contradiction. He's just put that in there and he's made that up. There's nothing. So that's why I thought, yes, I know what you mean, but it's not quite the same, apples to oranges a little bit. But yes, in the artistic ordering, there's absolutely that's the case. And in a play, though, in 1590, so Holinshed's Chronicles are written in 1587. In 1594, a play by the name of King Lear, but spelled Leir, is put on stage and essentially sticks to the story derived from Holinshed. So it does not deviate as Shakespeare's does. Shakespeare's play, as I say, written in 1605. No, maybe Shakespeare even saw this play. No reason why he couldn't have. Maybe he did. We know he draws from Holinshed's Chronicles for much of his historical accounts of English type historical themes and so forth. It's his source, his main source. So the death of Cordelia, which is clearly a Shakespearean invention, pushes tragedy really to the limit. And what it does is it breaks the idea that I've been presenting throughout the course from the outset about the Elizabethan world picture. It does. It starts to, in his mind, so there's this ideal order, and the kings mirror God. They enact his justice. They do it in his name. When there's a rebellion against the king, this results it's not just a political act, but it has theological implications, it has vast social implications, it has familial implications, it even goes into the natural realm. So that remember in Macbeth, horses are eating other horses, and lesser birds of prey are, killing greater birds of prey. So unnatural things. So there's this spillover. Everything relates to everything else. This seems like a third element in. It's a mathematical term. It's not, it doesn't, there's no rhyme or reason here. It just seems like it doesn't fit. So in that sense, it's purely evil. Because evil is really not a rational thing. We try and reason with evil and make sense of things, but at the end of the day, evil doesn't have a rational explanation. If it did, you could, to some degree, justify it. And of course, evil people try to justify themselves, but there is no justification for evil. So evil is an annihilationist act, and it is a privation of good. The Boethian or Augustinian notion of evil is the absence of good. And it's really it's almost a nothing. Macbeth was leaning that way insofar as when Lady Macbeth dies, Macbeth says, out, out, poor candle, and then life's a poor shadow, a tale full of sound and fury signifying nothing, told by an idiot, full of sound and fury signifying nothing. There's that sense of nihilism there. There's no meaning or purpose. Macbeth applies that to life in general. He's totally been consumed by darkness. There's no good left in him when he articulates that. His wife's life also is meaningless and purposeless. But it seemed in this story of Macbeth, it was just that she died. So in that sense, it had a purpose. To him as a character, all of his life was connected to his wife in his actions and so forth. So as a personal expression, his life was meaningless. But Shakespeare asserted no such thing in Macbeth. He asserted order, which we saw by Lady Macbeth and Macbeth both being extinguished and a kingdom being restored and so forth. Whereas here, it doesn't seem to serve any particular purpose whatsoever. It just seems absurd. And that will mark much of 20th century literature. Nihilism, existentialism, especially post-Second World War. So we're a long way from the Second World War now, at least seemingly. I don't have my poppy on. I should, but yeah, I can put it on. But it's distant enough from us now that the people who lived in that generation are almost gone. If you're born in 1945, you're 80 right now. So there are some with us now, but the memory of that is now is a historical thing, not a lived experience. And yet the despair that comes into a culture through such terrible conflict does not go away quickly. And that generation was very much marked by sort of a nihilism about the meaning and purpose of life. Stop going to churches. Huge. Even before that, like World War I is the pivot point in Western civilization in some ways. After that, in Europe, the faith is almost gone. Just big church attendance to nope. Second World War, the same thing starts to happen in North America. That sense of despair, hopelessness. There's a big fight, a battle against good and evil, yes, but there's a sense that the evil has crept in and hollowed out our own sense of optimism about the future and so forth. There was something pernicious about evil in that sense. So here it is only cropping up in the person of Cordelia. It's just a little thing, and now it starts growing, which is why I say there needs to be a recovery of Christian humanism after centuries of pushing hard against it and destroying it and any sense of hope and optimism about the future. We need to reassert the importance of human nature and the fact that we're made in the image of God and that God is providential in all of his ways and so forth. But comment or?
No, it's fine.
Okay. So this is a play as much about anything. Now, so it's unnatural, the death of Cordelia. In Shakespeare's sense, it has no purpose because in Shakespeare's play, nature is purposive. It's providential. It's ordered. God rules over it. There's natural law imbued in everything. Every act has a reason behind it and a purpose, and it's a moral one even. Whereas here it's unnatural. Now, let me just say something. Hamlet we haven't yet looked at, but let me compare and contrast. In Hamlet, if you say that something is unnatural, that's the word that's most used in Hamlet, by the way, natural and unnatural, these two back and forth. If you say that something is unnatural in Hamlet, it's evil. Whereas if it's natural, it's good. It's very romantic. There's a reason why the romantics love Hamlet, because they play on nature as good and unnatural as evil. And that's how Hamlet discusses things. And even though Hamlet will become skeptical because of what he sees, he doesn't ultimately deny that there is a natural order and that it's good. He never gets to that point, although he questions it strongly. We'll look at that when we come to it. Whereas in Lear, nature itself even is questioned, that it has any order or purpose or meaning. It seems chaotic. And that is a reflection of, as much as anything, Lear's old age and perhaps his own sanity. So Lear may well be, there's all people talk about mental health these days all the time. But this is a play very much about the human mind and about mental fitness. The play begins with Lear deciding to divide up his kingdom in three of his own volition. So take what's united and divide it before he's dead. Now, to his audience, to Shakespeare and his understanding of kingship as a reflection of God's providence and his ordering and his purposes, to do this is an act of rebellion against yourself. You're dividing what you've been charged to lead and unite. So fragmenting the kingdom is actually an evil act. Now, I think if we're not thinking the way Shakespeare's audience would, we wouldn't realize how bad this action is. It just seems that's not a very bright thing to do. We might even go to the obvious point, that maybe Lear is not, maybe he's not all there. He's losing his capacities. Maybe he's losing his mind. And I think that's there. But what we wouldn't conclude, which I think is part of the Elizabethan world picture, is that to some degree he is committing an evil act. That I don't think we grasp at the outset. But I think it's there. And if you read the characters, I think there's a sense of shock and horror and a sense that he has committed an act of treason against himself and against the kingdom. But he's the king. He may as well have killed himself for what he did. So in Lear, we see that the order of nature goes wrong in various ways. And so later on in Act 3, we'll see that there's a storm scene in which he literally loses his mind. Then he's clearly gone mad. He runs off into the wild, howling at the storm, calling upon the storm to, blow its cheeks and crack and throw lightning at him because he's going to vent back at it just as hard. So you have a man who's lost his mind and screaming at the thunder as if there's a contest going on there. So a man is literally decompensating right in front of us on stage. But is it just a loss of mental health, or is it greater than that? I think the answer is it's greater than that, because in Shakespeare it always has levels of allegory to it, if you will. King, do you have a comment here?
I was thinking maybe there's some kind of idea that Cordelia, so Cordelia refuses to take part in the whole process
She will not.
of buttering up her father
Yep.
for
Which makes
Yeah.
makes us love her.
But maybe it's not just that she should have refused to take part. Maybe she should have objected to the process before it even got started.
Well, how would she know?
Well, he says, "I've gathered you all here to give you stuff." And I mean, it seems that
Yes, but she wouldn't know he was going to give away the kingdom. He might say, "Well, I'm going to give you a, here's a jewel, here's a, yeah." When I'm 80, I love my daughters. I'm going to give you the royal ring. I'm going to give you this jewel. I'm going to give like something. I'm going to give you a duchy. You're the princess of this. I'm going to make you the princess of this region.
My train of thought was like,
but he's not even giving them. He's not even awarding them. He's dividing what's his.
Yeah.
It's like the tale of the prodigal son, where the father decides to act against him. It's the prodigal father.
Yeah, because I suppose where I was thinking is like science has a habit of discovering stuff that we already knew through the humanities. So one of the things that they've recently discovered is that men with daughters tend to live longer. Primarily.
Oh, that's good to hear.
Primarily, they actually found a correlation of 2 years per daughter.
Probably because the daughters look after their fathers in their older age.
Pay attention to the father's health, and the sons just go, "Dad's falling apart." You should see.
I have no trouble believing that.
But I kind of wonder if her dying has to do with the fact that really it was her and her sisters, but it was her duty to pay close enough attention to help him before he was unfit to rule.
I don't know. We'll put your speculation on a hold, and maybe we can come back to it. Let me get rid of this. But the scene begins with a summons, and it's the court. And just think of the idea of the prodigal father here, and hold that in your mind, because really that's what we're talking about. Not the prodigal son, but and a father who's good, who loves and redeems the prodigal son. But we have a father who's now prodigal in his relation to his children, because that's the order. Rather than a beneficent God whose grace we can't understand, we have a really dyspeptic, old, insane father who really doesn't love his daughters. He craves their love. And this is the perversity of the scene as well. He wants them to tell him how much they love him, and he will reward them accordingly, which is not love at all. It's extortion. And so everything about Lear is disordered and perverse. His act, his need love rather than gift love, as Lewis calls it. Like, he needs their love. And truthfully, when you're older, you do become more needy. You become more like a child. Very difficult for everyone when suddenly the tables turn. You go from mom and dad looking after all your needs, and suddenly they become needy, and they don't even realize it themselves necessarily. So that's the difficult conversations, where we're suddenly adult who has always looked after things, kept order, been the pillar of sanity, becomes incapable of that and doesn't recognize it. That's a real problem. Yes.
Could also be commenting on like the fact that true virtue can't be purchased like with monetary, like
of course,
monetary means.
Of course.
It's almost commenting on even like, I think if my understanding is correct, in the 1300s, the Pope started instituting a more monetary value system.
Yeah.
And you had
indulgences then.
Yeah, indulgences, a lack of virtue being the forefront of things. It's almost a comment too on the two systems, where one is focused on monetary. Well, I can just buy someone's love, and the other is saying, well, no, truly virtue cannot be purchased by a means of.
Well, that's an interesting point. I don't think he's commenting on that per se, but that is certainly one of the problems with that practice, because it no longer represents virtue. It represents a symbol of virtue, which isn't necessarily even virtuous.
Yeah.
And then that the abuses that come with that are, can magnify almost infinitum ad infinitum. Let me begin with the play, though, because, and unlike some of his tragedies or some of his plays, although truthfully, all of them begin pretty quickly on with the crisis. Like you're thrown. This is the thing about a Shakespearean play. If you've arrived late to the theater, you're already in trouble. You got to be there right act 1, scene 1, because it's throwing you right into the midst of the challenge that we'll have to deal with the rest of the play in resolving in some way. We saw that with The Tempest. We saw that with Measure for Measure, Midsummer Night's Dream. I mean, all the plays. It's immediately into crisis. And that's the dramatic aspect of it, the action. So there's a real problem, and it's such a big problem that we're going to have to deal with the consequences for quite a while now. There's no way around that. So Act 1, Scene 1 is the pivot point for the whole play, and there is a twofold error that Lear commits. One, he decides he's going to abdicate his throne and divide his kingdom in 3. We're not living in the day of constitutional monarchy where the monarch serves but the parliament actually rules in the stead of the king is law and order. There's no parliament here in this play. This is set back before parliament even exists. Note that there is no parliament in King Lear. It's an Anglo-Saxon story. There's no parliament set up there as a counterweight to the king. If the king abdicates, there's no justice in the kingdom. So it's a terrible act. So it's a crime against reason. It's a crime against the natural order even. So it's somebody who's responsible acting like he has no responsibility. And he divests responsibility to 3. Okay, well, they might be responsible, but now what before was a unified kingdom is now divided in 3. And how are they going to relate to one another? Well, they're probably going to fight. So he creates civil war, just like Macbeth did, which began discussing putting down a civil war, and it created an even bigger problem. Okay, but here we have a king that does it. So it's from the top side down rather than from below. And Shakespeare's audience would know that there should be unity under one sovereign. Secondly, though, and this is the other error, and it's a subordinate theme, but it's still significant. He rejects and disposes with Cordelia, dispossesses her entirely, and accepts, even worse, Goneril and Regan as loving daughters when they're clearly not. They're virtue signaling. Literally, they're virtue signaling, and she's virtuous. So by banishing Cordelia, he banishes virtue. The one vestige of virtue in the kingdom he gets rid of. So right, and so that's a symbol. What has he rejected in himself? His virtue. How do you know? Because virtue just left the kingdom. He just sent her out. The personification of virtue. Now, I do think there's an allegorical element. I don't think it's to be read that way, but Shakespeare is more of a medievalist than he is often seen as. He does think that characters represent certain virtues, allegories. They're allegorical in that sense, even though he doesn't present them as allegorical figures per se. Still, they have that sort of purpose. So when he throws Cordelia out, he throws out virtue. And he equates the value of love with land and with providence, which also is a crime against reason, as we said earlier. Now he's reducing everything to something he can control. Old men can control money. And in fact, they do control through money. Here's the problem. The older you get, the less capable you are, but the wealthier you usually grow. And so how do you control things without the ability to actually control them? Well, you control the money tap. Turn that off, but not by involving yourself, but just by. So he's using his power now, but it's without the virtue or the love that comes with it. He's just turning everything about the thing that he still has control over, which is says you're cut off, no money for you, no land, no possession, you're out. So those things, and as I said, the two sisters, Goneril and Regan, are just virtue signalers. And the two errors, that is abdicating his throne and dividing his kingdom in three, and the dispossessing of Cordelia, are inextricably linked. So when Lear throws out Cordelia, it probably reflects the fact that he's already lost his virtue in his governance of affairs. So the evil and the disorder and the madness of King Lear that we see in Act 3, we already see in Act 1. It's a sort of a moral madness. It's a great symptom, or a symbol almost, of the abolition of man that C.S. Lewis talks about. Here we have a man without a chest on the throne. And what ensues from a man without virtue in his chest is bad for everyone, including him, actually. Now, the subtext of the scene is there as well, and it's behind what's being spoken, and it's to some degree in the interaction between the characters, Act 1, Scene 1, is the total collections of feelings and actions and motives underlying the characters in the play. And you need, I think, to have a sense of the subtext to portray the characters effectively. So that if you're an actor in this, you really have to be ready, because your interactions are decisive for, you're showing your character in a few lines very quickly. You can't get it wrong. So the reason I say that is the character with the fewest lines in the play and the most complicated, or the scene rather, and the most complicated subtext is Cordelia. She says almost nothing in Act 1, Scene 1. And so it begs the question, what is Cordelia feeling and thinking here? And so if you're Cordelia on the stage acting this, how do you convey to the audience what's in your head and what's in your heart? How do you do that? Very difficult, especially since modern audiences are not very good readers or observers, because she's the main character here, even though she's the least important character. She's in a way the most important character. Cordelia, how do you, if you're the person staging King Lear, how do you make sure that people see Cordelia and her reaction? Do you push her towards the front of the stage a little bit more? And maybe. And even though she's not speaking, have her there so people can see how Cordelia is reacting, just in terms of her facial expressions or body language. That's, maybe you do, because I think she's an important character. And she will have to be able to externalize what she feels. And what's interesting is she's going to try and be rational, but here's the problem. In response to an absurd act, how do you act rationally? What's the rational response to such absurdity? And remember, she's a girl and a daughter. She has no ability to change the situation. She has to act like a woman. She has to act like one of Jane Austen's heroines. You know, to orchestrate things as a dramaturge from behind the scenes, but it's not her place to fix things. She can't do it. Doesn't have the standing. So when she finally comes to speak, she says, unhappy that I am, I cannot heave my heart into my mouth. That's a pretty brief speech. At the same time, I think she is the most rational character in the play. She embodies rationality as well as true fidelity. She is the true daughter. So if you want to call the play The Prodigal Father, she is the the flipped around version of the father in the prodigal son. She's the good character. She is faithful, never loses her fidelity to her father, does not give up on him, does everything in her power to try and save her dad, who has banished her from the kingdom. Right to the very end, to the point of her death, she tries to do that. I can say more about that. We will say more about that next week when we looked at Cordelia and look at her as a Christ figure. There's something there in that. But as I say, by dispossessing her, Lear rejects reason and shows a fragmentation, the beginning of a fragmentation which he will not be able to stop. It just spirals out of control. Comments or questions? I'll read some of the play, Act 1, Scene 1. We'll just do that, and then we'll take a brief break. But let me read this because I think it's very moving and very important. So Act 1, Scene 1, Kent, Gloucester, and Edmund. Now these, I guess it's Act 2 where the key scene begins, but these characters are significant figures in the play. Kent as Lear's loyal servant, very loyal. After Cordelia, the most admirable character. Gloucester, a buffoon, an aristocrat who's been a bit naughty. He's had children outside of marriage with another woman, and is boasting about it a little bit, and Edmund, who's his bastard son. And so what we have is the beginning, and this is also unusual, we have the subplot for the plot. Part of the disorder of the whole play is that the subplot is coming in before the plot. In a sense, we're being shown the most evil character right at the beginning, and that's Edmund. Edmund is thrust to the forefront of the play in a way that's unusual, as usually we begin with the plot, and then the subplot comes along to reinforce the plot. Here it comes right in, and Edmund, the most evil character, is given place front and center. So Kent, I thought the king had more affected the Duke of Albany than Cornwall. It did always seem so to us, but now, in the division of the kingdom, it appears not which of the dukes he values most, for equalities are so weighed that curiosity in neither can make choice of either's moiety. Portion. Note that Gloucester is speaking like a common man. He's not speaking in verse. He's a degraded noble. He's degraded himself in the same way that Lear has. Maybe this is a kingdom in which iniquity has so grown that the nobility themselves are corrupted. And Lear himself is. It's not that there's no virtue left, but not much. Virtue is going to have to be sacrificed to restore something here. But this is a bad kingdom. Gloucester is a bad man. His son is an even worse man, but he's his father's son in many ways. Yes?
I know sometimes in pre-Christian plays it gets a little...
And this is a pre-Christian play.
It's a little muddy, but how pre-Christian does this get depicted?
Well, I'm going to answer that as we go along. But that is one of the questions here. Because Lear shows no sign of Christian thought. He doesn't think so, and again, you wouldn't necessarily know that, and you would expect he would act otherwise, because Shakespeare regularly puts Christian thoughts into, Athenians and Romans and stuff like that. But so what does he do here? Well, he doesn't do it here. Surprising, given what we are prone to expect from Shakespeare. And then Kent says, "Is not this your son, my lord? His breeding, sir, hath been at my charge. I have so often blushed to acknowledge him, that now I am brazed to it. I cannot conceive you. Sir, this young fellow's mother could, whereupon she grew round-wombed, and had indeed, sir, a son for her cradle, ere she had a husband for her bed. Do you smell a fault?" In other words, he impregnated some woman before they were married, and he's a bastard, in other words. He's no legal standing. That's also going to become a part of the natural and unnatural, legal and bastard. And it's going to rankle with Edmund that he is seen as a lesser, in fact, a totally non-acknowledged son. Even though he's from a nobleman, there's no nobility in him. And he decides that evil will be his good. If that's the case, if he's not going to be given any opportunity to show his value or his virtue in life, and he's just going to be dismissed as a bastard, he says, then I'm going to be the biggest bastard you could ever think. I can do bastard for you. You want to see bastard? I will show you bastard. That's his. So he's an angry young man. Why is he angry? Because his father was not virtuous, didn't care anything about it, thought it was good sport. Now, well, he's going to say exactly these words. Do you smell a fault? I cannot wish the fault undone, the issue of it being so proper. Now, Kent is being very gracious here. He's a good-looking young man. And let's just, well, this is an uncomfortable discussion. Kent is charitable in his response. And Gloucester, but I have a son, sir, by order of law, some year elder than this, who yet is no dearer in my account. Though this knave came something saucily to the world before he was sent for, yet was his mother fair. There was good sport at his making, and the whoreson must be acknowledged. Do you know this noble gentleman, Edmund? No. Now, Edmund's sitting there. What's Edmund doing at this point where he's being discussed there? Does he betray any anger there? I think he does. He's to the audience. I think he's being called a whoreson, a bastard, whatever, and his father's making fun of it all. And his father, on the other hand, being such a buffoon, is saying that he loves him, but he's still humiliated.
Well, he
And
says he loves him no less than the other son.
yeah, so he may hate them both. He doesn't give a rip about either of them. That may well be the case. So what we have here then in Gloucester is a man that is not, who's a nobleman without nobility. Again, all of this you have to glean very quickly. It helps to have read the play. Shakespeare's audience doesn't have that benefit. We do. No, my lord of Kent, remember him hereafter as my honorable friend. My services to your lordship. I must love you and sue to know you better. Sir, I shall study deserving. He hath been out 9 years, and away he shall again. And then he hears the sound of a senate trumpet. The king is coming. March in. But this is quite the way to introduce the play. To introduce a corrupt nobleman, his angry son, and a very mannerly Kent. Now come, as I say, that it's not a separate scene, but it's like a subplot being introduced before the main characters thrust themselves on the stage. But it's telling because the mirror of, and it's a foil. Gloucester is a foil for Lear. And they're similar, I would submit to you. Although the children of Lear are not bastards, he is an immoral king. Okay, enter. Attend the lords of France and Burgundy, Gloucester, I shall, my lord. And then he goes out. Meantime, we shall express our darker purpose. Give me the map there. Know that we have divided in 3 our kingdom, and 'tis our fast intent to shake all cares and business from our age, conferring them on younger strengths, while we unburthened crawl toward death. Our son of Cornwall, and you are no less deserving son of Albany, we have this hour a constant will to publish our daughters' several dowers, that future strife may be prevented now. The princes, France and Burgundy, great rivals in our youngest daughter's love, long in our court have made their amorous sojourn, and here are to be answered. Tell me, my daughters, since now we will divest us both of rule, interest of territory, cares of state, which of you shall we say doth love us most? That we our largest bounty may extend where nature doth with merit challenge. Goneril, our eldest born, speak first. Sir, I love you more than word can wield the matter. Dearer than eyesight, space, and liberty, beyond what can be valued, rich or rare, no less than life, with grace, health, beauty, honor, as much as child e'er loved, or father found, a love that makes breath poor and speech unable, beyond all manner of so much I love you. And then Cordelia, as an aside. Now, where does she stand? I think she has to be towards the front of the stage because she's such an important character. But as an aside, the other characters don't hear her. So what do? Maybe the light gets brighter on her. It dims a little bit for the others, but in some ways you draw attention to her. Separation from the group, the fact they can't hear. What shall Cordelia speak? Love and be silent. She doesn't like the hypocrisy play that she's been drawn into. She doesn't want to pretend to love her father like she's being asked to do. A play of love. It's just a, pretend for the sake of how much money we're going to get. She hates this. It's wrong at every level. Of all these bounds, even from this line to this, even from this line to this, with shadowy forests and with champaigns rich, with plenteous rivers and wide-skirted meads, we make thee lady, he said to Goneril. To thine and Albany's issue be this perpetual. What says our second daughter, our dearest Regan, wife of Cornwall? Speak. I am made of that self-metal as my sister, and prize me at her worth. In my true heart I find she names my very deed of love. Only she comes too short, that I profess myself an enemy to all other joys, which the most precious square of sense possesses, and find I am alone felicitate in your highness love. Cordelia is, of course, the fact that she's so upset about it shows how much she loves her father. Like, that says more than anything. Than poor Cordelia, and yet not so, since I am sure my love's more ponderous than my tongue. So she's in a dilemma. She has not come here to defy her father. I think we need to understand that as well. She's being pushed into a scenario that she hates, and yet she loves her father so dearly, she feels she must be able to do something in this situation and finds herself unable to do it. But it's a failure. It's not a deliberate act of rebellion on her part, right? I think that's important as well for character development here. So then Lear, in response to Regan, to thee and thine hereditary ever remain this ample third of our fair kingdom, no less in space, validity, and pleasure than that conferred on Goneril. Now, our joy, although our last and least, to whose young love the vines of France and milk of Burgundy strive to be interest. What can you say to draw a third more opulent than your sisters? Speak. Nothing, my lord. Nothing. Nothing. Nothing will come of nothing. Speak again. Unhappy that I am, I cannot heave my heart into my mouth. I love your majesty according to my bond, no more nor less. How, Cordelia, mend your speech a little, lest you may mar your fortunes. The old man is embarrassed. Here's the problem. He's a vain old man, and she is not flattering him. He loves her the most, and he's quite open about it. In fact, there's clear favoritism here, which is a problem that he shares with Gloucester. And that will create enmity amongst the sisters as well. So Goneril and Regan will hate Cordelia precisely because she's the favored younger sibling. But because she's embarrassed him, he's starting to get angry at her. He should understand why she doesn't want to do this. He's put himself in a position where he has to strike out. And he does. Good my lord, says Cordelia, you have begot me, bred me, loved me. I return those duties back as right fit. Obey you, love you, and most honor you. Why have my sisters husbands if they say they love you all? Happily when I shall wed, the Lord whose hand must take my plight shall carry half my love with him, half my care and duty. Sure, I shall never marry like my sisters, to love my father all. They don't even love their own husbands. Like, she's pointing out the logical absurdity of what they've said, and she's not going to do that. In other words, she's entirely rational, but also her professions of fidelity are real for that, and theirs are clearly grasping hypocrisy. And then Lear, because he's still embarrassed and doesn't understand love, it seems, but goes thy heart with this? I, my good Lord, so young and so untender? So young, my Lord, and true. And now comes the Lear moment, the madness of Lear. And he just blows up in public, just explodes. Still speaking in verse, hasn't totally lost it in that sense, but he has lost all sense of proportion, of love, of virtue. That's all gone in his speech. Let it be so. Thy truth then be thy dower. For by the sacred radiance of the sun, the mysteries of Hecate and the night, note all these are pagan symbols, and Hecate, Shakespeare's audience, remember we had Macbeth and Hecate, the Satan, goddess of the underworld, queen of the witches, and the night, by all the operations of the orbs from whom we do exist and cease to be. So he thinks when he dies, he's going to be annihilated, nothing left of him. He's a materialist. He's not even a virtuous pagan. No reward for virtue after life or after death. No punishment for vice. We're just going to stop existing. From whom we do exist, the orbs, and cease to be. Here is a Darwinist, in other words. Here I disclaim all my paternal care, propinquity and property of blood, and as a stranger to my heart and me, hold thee from this forever. The barbarous Scythian, or he that makes his generation messes to gorge his appetite, shall to my bosom be as well neighbored, pitied, and relieved, as thou my sometime daughter. And now Kent comes in, the good Kent that began playing. Good, my liege, peace, Kent, come not between the dragon and his wrath. I loved her most, and thought to set my rest on her kind nursery. And then to Cordelia, hence, and avoid my sight, so be my grave my peace, as here I give her father's heart from her. Call France, who stirs? Call Burgundy. So they're out of the room, France and Burgundy. They're going to be drawn in. We're waiting for them. In the meantime, he speaks to his two son-in-laws, Cornwall and Albany. With my two daughters, dowers, digest the third. Let pride, which she calls plainness, marry her. I do invest you jointly with my power, preeminence, and all the large effects that troop with majesty. Ourself by monthly course, with reservation of 100 nights, by you to be sustained, shall our abode make with you by due turn. Only we shall retain the name and all the addition to a king. The sway, revenue, and execution of the rest, beloved sons, be yours, which, to confirm this coronet, part between you. So here's the symbol of this. I take the crown, I'll cut it in half. It's like dividing himself in two. As I say, if you read the parable of the prodigal son, you flip it around. It's an inversion of that story. Royal Lear, says Kent, again, the good virtuous servant, whom I have ever honored as my king, loved as my father, as my master followed, as my great patron, thought on in my prayers. The bow is bent and drawn. Make from the shaft, as in watch out, I'm going to shoot you dead. It's like he's raging. Let it fall rather, though the fork invade the region of my heart. Be Kent unmannerly when Lear is mad. What wouldst thou do, old man? Think'st thou that duty shall have dread to speak when power to flattery bows? To plainness honor's bound. When majesty falls to folly, reserve thy state, and in thy best consideration check this hideous rashness. Answer my life, my judgment. Thy youngest daughter does not love thee least, nor are these empty hearted, whose low sounds reverb no hollowness. Kent, on thy life no more. My life I have never held but as a pawn to wage against thine enemies. Ne'er feared to lose it, thy safety being motive. Out of my sight. See better, Lear, and let me still remain the true blank of thine eyes. Now by Apollo, King, thou swearest thy gods in vain. Oh, vassal miscreant! And he stood like the sword's coming out. He's so angry. He's going to, slay him. And then Albany in court, dear sir, forbear. And then, but Kent, an old man, virtuous, is not going to back down here. He sees that this is the hill to die on. As the servant, this is his hill to die on here. Kill thy physician, and the fee bestow upon the foul disease. Revoke thy gift, or whilst I can vent clamor from my throat, I'll tell thee thou dost evil. Hear me, recreant on thine allegiance, hear me, that thou hast sought to make us break our vow, which we durst never yet, and with strange pride to come betwixt our sentence and our power, which not our nature nor our place can bear. Our potency made good, take thy reward. 5 days do we allot thee for provision to shield thee from disasters of the world, and on the 6th to turn thy hated back upon our kingdom. If on the 10th day following thy banished trunk be found in our dominions, the moment is thy death. Away, by Jupiter, this shall not be revoked. And then Kent, fare thee well, king, sith thus thou wilt appear, freedom lives hence, and banishment is here. And then Kent to Cordelia, the gods to their dear shelter take thee, maid, that justly thinks and hast most rightly said. To Regan and Goneril, and your large speeches, may your deeds approve, that good effects may spring from words of love. Thus Kent, O princes, bids you all adieu. He'll shape his old course in a country new. And I'll stop it there, and we'll pick it up after the break. But we will see France and Burgundy come in, and we'll do. But the Act 1, Scene 1 is a huge scene. There's so many things that have happened and are happening. I'll stop it there, though, because I want to